Welcome to Hungarian Insights, your go-to channel for exploring Hungary's rich history, vibrant culture, and language learning resources. What began as a student protest turned into one of the most powerful uprisings against Soviet domination in post-war Europe? In this episode, we unpack how ordinary Hungarians, students, workers, and intellectuals rose up to demand freedom and paid the ultimate price.
Launching a deep dive into the Hungarian Uprising, a really pivotal event. It was this fierce national resistance, but also globally a defining moment for humanitarian aid.
Absolutely. And we've got a really incredible stack of material for this one. Historical reviews, detailed refugee studies, even the UN Special Committee reports. And just for context, you really need to grasp the scale of the desperation that followed. This event, it triggered the most dramatic refugee crisis in mainland Europe between the end of World War II and, well, the collapse of Yugoslavia in the 90s.
That sheer scale really frames the human stakes right away.
It does.
But the question that kind of jumps off the page for me is the speed. How did a student demonstration, which seems relatively small, how did that ignite a national revolution? One strong enough to challenge the entire Soviet sphere?
It's the key question.
And maybe even more interesting, what was this unique sort of decentralized political form the resistance took when it got going?
Yeah.
So that's our mission today. Understand the spark, the fire, and of course the fallout.
Okay, so to get to that spark, we have to start with the pressure cooker situation.
Right.
Post-World War II, Hungary, it's under Soviet military occupation, controlled by the local Communist Party, the MDP.
And the economy was creating immediate, just widespread suffering, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The sources make it clear the system was really designed to extract value, not build it up.
So you had these radical nationalization policies, often pretty incompetent, right?
Right. And on top of that, these huge external burdens. Hungary was forced to pay massive war reparations, about $300 million US.
Wow.
And they had to fully support the Soviet garrisons stationed right there on Hungarian soil.
And we can't just throw that number out there. What did that actually mean for the country?
Well, the Hungarian National Bank, they estimated the reparations alone were between 19 and 22% of the annual national income.
19 to 22%.
Yeah. Think about that. Nearly a quarter of everything the entire nation produced was just siphoned off immediately.
That's not just a burden. That makes recovery impossible.
Pretty much. It makes the whole idea a farce. And the human cost was just devastating.
So despite what the officials were claiming about national income.
Right. Despite those claims, the average worker saw a huge drop in their real living standards. Disposable income for workers' employees in 1952. It was only 2/3 of what they'd had back in 1938.
2/3? That's drastic.
It is. You had shortages of basic food. People were forced into these compulsory subscriptions for state bonds that just drained any savings they might have had.
So when people are that desperate economically, the political ground is fertile for revolt.
Exactly. It's laid.
Okay, so the economy is the pressure cooker. Where did the steam first start to leak out, politically speaking?
Well, initially it came from the intelligentsia. Often, actually, from within the party itself.
Interesting.
Writers, journalists, they started voicing sharper criticisms around 1955.
Yeah.
Particularly through these discussion forums, they called them Petőfi circles.
Petőfi circles?
Yeah, they were meeting places for young, often quite disillusioned communist intellectuals who were questioning the regime's methods, its results.
And that intellectual discontent, it found a really powerful symbolic moment in October 56.
It did.
You see this massive shift in the public mood during the ceremonial reburial of Laszlo Rach. He was a communist leader executed by the hardliners.
Right, purged and killed. His reburial became this huge, visible rejection of the regime's brutality. Massive crowds turned out. It really emboldened the internal party opposition.
The ground was definitely primed.
And the trigger came just over 2 weeks later, October 23rd.
That's the date. The revolt really starts as a massive student demonstration.
Yeah, students from the Technical University, they resurrected the band MESZ Student Union.
And they marched to the radio building, wanting to broadcast their demands.
But the State Security Police, the AVH, everyone hated them.
Right.
They detained a student delegation, and then they fired on the demonstrators. That's when the violence just erupted.
Instantly.
And right away, the revolution found its symbol, That powerful visual everyone still recognizes.
Yeah, the Hungarian flag, but with the communist coat of arms cut right out, that hole in the middle. Pure defiance.
Exactly.
And in those first few days, it's amazing the revolution actually achieved this stunning, though temporary, political win.
It really was stunning.
Yeah.
The AVH, universally despised, formally disbanded.
Dawn.
The reformist Imre Nagy replaced the hardliner Hegedüs as prime minister.
And he pledged free elections.
And the big one, the absolute red line for Moscow, withdrawal from the Warsaw Pact.
A truly spectacular, if tragically brief, moment of success. So that brings us to what I find really the most fascinating part of this deep dive. The actual character of the resistance itself. The Soviets, of course, immediately tried to paint the rebels as, fascists or foreign agents.
But the sources flatly contradict. The UN Special Committee looked into it and called that claim totally inadequate and superficial.
Right.
This uprising wasn't led by figures from before the war. It was driven by students, intellectuals, soldiers, and crucially, workers. Many of the key fighters were actually communists themselves, or former communists, protesting what they saw as a total distortion of their original ideals.
Yeah, the sources make a really strong case for calling it a genuine workers' revolution. They point out that workers were the overwhelming majority of the combatants.
And they suffered the majority of the deaths fighting the Soviets.
Absolutely.
And just look at the concentration of labor. Budapest was the industrial heartland. You had these huge places like the Cecil complex employing, 40,000 workers?
30,000 in one place.
Yeah. So when the revolution kicked off, these workers did something really profound, really revolutionary. They immediately set up spontaneous political and economic bodies, these workers' councils.
In the factories, in the mines.
Exactly.
And these weren't just like committees to organize strikes, were they? They were actually taking control.
Precisely. They were organs of self-management. They got rid of deeply unpopular things like the production norms, those quotas that everyone hated.
So what was their political vision then? It wasn't capitalism, you said.
No, not a return to capitalism or the old ways.
Yeah.
It was often described as a kind of Yugoslav-style socialism plus the workers' councils.
Okay, let's unpack that phrase because it sounds technical, but it seems critical to why Moscow saw them as such a threat. What does that mean in practice?
Well, fundamentally, it means decentralized power. Yugoslavia, under Tito, right, they had embraced worker self-management, a slightly more market-based economy, kept their distance from Soviet central planning. Hungarian councils took that idea and essentially supercharged it. They wanted genuine democratic socialist principles, power residing with the producers locally, not channeled through some central party bureaucracy in Budapest, or worse, dictated by Moscow.
That's the real threat then, this spontaneous, functioning, democratic alternative to the whole Soviet model.
Exactly. That's the ultimate threat.
That kind of organic, bottom-up control is incredibly potent.
Yeah.
And as the fighting sort of solidified, these different groups came together under the banner of the National Guard.
Yeah. And on the military side, you had Colonel Paul Milleter. He commanded the Killian Barracks, became this heroic figure representing the insurgents.
Right, and he was quickly promoted, became Minister of Defense in Nagy's government just before the end.
Tragically, yes.
Sure.
But beyond the military structure, what really defines this moment, I think, is the incredible moral high voltage running through the country. The anecdotes in our sources are just stunning.
They really are. They show this depth of social solidarity. You read accounts of collection boxes for families of the fallen, piled high with money on the sidewalks, completely untouched.
Amazing.
Store windows broken in the fighting, but the merchandise inside just sat there for days. Nobody looted.
There was this immediate, unified, patriotic spirit. It just transcended all the old social divisions.
And the students gained this huge moral authority, didn't they?
Immense prestige. They were acting as mediators in disputes between neighbors, even cases where one suspected the other of being an AVH informer.
Incredible. There's one story, one little vignette that really captures it for me.
Oh, yeah.
It describes a building janitor, a group people often associated with being informers for the old regime.
Right.
Showing just decency and compassion to the students, offering them food. It's this perfect symbol of that moment where everyone briefly was united. National freedom, self-determination. That was the goal.
Powerful image.
But that moment of unified hope, well, it was violently, brutally cut short.
It was. The Soviet Politburo completely reversed its earlier promise to withdraw troops.
They changed their minds.
On November 4th, A massive Soviet force, much larger than the original garrison, invaded. That was the start of the second, decisive intervention to crush the revolution.
This is the moment of just high drama, but also cold, calculated betrayal.
Absolutely.
Premier Nagy, he broadcasts his final desperate plea to the nation, to the world. It's 5:20 a.m. November 4th. He announces the Soviet attack.
And Free Radio Kossuth, the voice of the revolution, it goes silent just after 8 a.m.
But here's the really shocking part, the political double-cross.
Yes. Simultaneously, János Kádár, who is a minister in Nagy's own government,
It is a double.
he announces the formation of a new Soviet-backed revolutionary worker peasant government at 6 a.m. on the exact same radio frequency.
Just takes over the airwaves. Kádár basically appears out of thin air, claims he had to ask for Soviet help to crush these sinister forces of reaction.
It's incredible cynicism.
Was he always a Moscow loyalist deep down, or did this genuinely shock people?
Oh, it was a profound shock. Kádár had been part of the reform movement. He had actually been imprisoned by the Stalinists earlier. He served in Nagy's transitional government.
So his sudden defection.
It allowed the Soviets to pretend this was just an internal Hungarian affair. Not a foreign invasion crushing a popular uprising.
Maintaining the fiction.
Exactly. And the tragedy was completed when Paul Malater and the Hungarian delegation were arrested, November 3rd at Tukul. They were there negotiating the technical details of the Soviet withdrawal.
While negotiating, a clear violation of international law.
Blatant. Both Malater and Imre Nagy were later executed in June 1958.
So the military resistance is crushed. But the revolution didn't just evaporate, did it? The sources talk about this really potent period of passive resistance afterwards.
That's right. Fighting continued fiercely in some working-class areas like Budapest and Sepal Island until maybe November 9th, 11th.
But after that?
After that, the workers' councils launched this campaign of non-cooperation. Factories just stayed idle for almost 2 months.
2 months.
Yeah, basically. Their demand was simple.
Yeah.
Soviet troops out before we go back to work. It caused a total economic shutdown.
That really speaks volumes about the decentralized power they still held, even under occupation. They lost the military fight, but they were holding the state hostage economically.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It took until mid-December for workers to be forced back, mainly due to just dire necessity, needing to feed their families. And often, they only went back with Soviet soldiers standing right there, intimidating them. And meanwhile, the repression was brutal, immediate.
Yeah, the mass deportations are just horrifying to read about.
They are. Thousands of Hungarians, many not even directly involved in the fighting, just arrested by the Soviet military command and shipped off to the USSR, especially in those first 3 weeks after November 4th.
That's terrifying.
And what's really fascinating, in a deeply cynical way, Soviet officers sometimes use the promise of bringing those deportees back as leverage.
Leverage? How?
To get the defiant workers' councils to finally end their strikes. It shows the Soviets knew how powerful the councils were. They were willing to bargain, deceitfully, of course, to break their resistance.
Wow. So the suppression immediately triggers that global shockwave we talked about at the start.
Yes. About 200,000 Hungarians fled the country.
200,000. For a small nation, that's a huge demographic shock. What,
Right.
1.5, 1.7% of the entire population? Gone. Almost overnight.
A massive exodus. Austria bore the initial brunt, providing asylum for the vast majority, about 173,000 refugees.
And the scale of this relief effort, it was unprecedented, wasn't it?
It really was. The UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, they officially called the emergency effort an event of outstanding significance. It permanently expanded the scope, the capacity of the organization for future crises.
And the flight itself was selective. It dramatically impacted Hungary's future demographics.
Very much so. 2/3 of the refugees were men, which just exacerbated the existing gender imbalance back home. And crucially, the majority were from younger generations, which meant the average age of the population left behind actually increased.
Who was the typical refugee, if there was one?
Well, the profile was often defined as male, under 25, maybe a student or skilled worker, though about 25% were women.
So Hungary lost this huge chunk of its youth, its skilled labor, its intellectual
That
energy.
massive brain drain and
Yep.
energy drain.
And this wasn't just a humanitarian crisis, was it? For the West, it was a massive Cold War propaganda victory.
Oh, absolutely. The successful mobilization of funds, of infrastructure for resettlement. Yes, there was humanitarian concern, but it was also fueled by that strong anti-communist political culture in the West.
Every refugee was seen as like a vote against the Soviet system.
Exactly, a political victory. The whole event brought world renown to the freedom fighters, and it really marked the beginning of the end for that sort of benevolent humanitarian image that international socialism had tried to project.
The mask slipped.
Big time. The international outrage was real. You saw Spain, the Netherlands, Switzerland boycotting the 1956 Melbourne Olympics in protest.
Right, the Olympics.
And of course, who can forget the water polo match? The infamous blood in the water match between the Soviet and Hungarian teams.
Extremely violent.
Incredibly violent. And it ended with a decisive 4-0 Hungarian victory, a huge moment of symbolic sporting revenge.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, the central lesson from 1956 seems pretty clear.
I think so.
We saw how popular anger, really fueled by deep economic despair and political repression, it didn't just explode into fighting, it manifested in the spontaneous creation of these genuine democratic political organs.
Workers' councils.
Yeah, that decentralized power defined by those councils and that profound, even if fleeting moment of national unity, that was the real danger to the Soviet model, wasn't it?
It absolutely was. And the Hungarian uprising left this immense lasting legacy, not just in the hundreds of thousands who fled and were resettled across the globe, but in exposing forever the brutal reality of Soviet control. And it fundamentally changed how the international community, through organizations like the UNHCR, approached big refugee crises during the Cold War.
It's impossible to ignore the power those workers' councils held, however briefly.
Dynamic, self-organized.
Right. And the Kádár government, once they had crushed the military resistance, they quickly promised to keep socialist achievements, but at the same time systematically dismantled those very councils.
The contradiction is stark.
So here's our final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. What does the short-lived success of that truly self-organized, decentralized democracy, embodied by the workers' councils, tell us about the ideal and maybe the often frustrated relationship between powerful, spontaneous labor movements and central state power, even when that state claims to speak for the workers?
Something to definitely ponder as you connect these historical dots. Thanks for joining us for the deep dive.
Our podcast discussions are based on our ebook, Hungary's Hall of Fame in a Nutshell. History, literature, art, music, science, sport. Scan the QR code or check the link in the description to download your copy of Hungary's Hall of Fame in a Nutshell. As a special bonus, you'll also receive the Illustrated Companion, featuring over 100 detailed illustrations to visually enrich your understanding of the book's content. Thank you for watching.